Welcome back to the agenda. So 2 days ago, the University of Johannesburg conferred an honorary degree on Order of Companions of O.R. Tambo recipient, Professor Ibrahim Gambari. Professor Gambari is not only a foreign citizen who has promoted South African interests through cooperation, solidarity and support, as the order prescribes, but his career path includes serving as Nigerian Minister of External Affairs to United Nations Undersecretary. Yesterday, he gave a talk at the University of Johannesburg, and it was titled South Africa and Nigeria, Africa's Indispensable Relationship. He's here to help us reflect on SA and world issues, particularly as South Africa celebrates 29 years of democracy. Prof, a good morning to you, and thank you so much for joining us on the agenda.
It's my pleasure.
You know, it's an interesting time. We've been doing a lot of commemorations this week in South Africa. 2 days ago, we were commemorating 30 years since the passing of O.R. Tambo. Today, 29 years of democracy. And you've participated in a lot of the processes that took place to get South Africa to where we are, right? You met with late ANC President O.R. Tambo in Zambia. You received President Mandela at the UN, and you worked with former President Tambo in preparation to bring South Africa back into the UN. I think let's start firstly with what you make of some of those leaders that you interacted with and the role that they've played in bringing South Africa to where it is today.
Well, the first person that I met was, of course, the late Oliver Tambo, and what an impressive man. Totally committed to the struggle. Very emotional, his commitment, and having met him, you just feel that you get a sense of why the freedom struggle must succeed, and that victory was certain. Now, of course, in the case of President Mandela, well, I received him in New York in 1990 when he, as chairman of the United Nations Special Committee Against Apartheid, the last chairman, so I was his host in a sense, and what a figure, iconic figure, and he really showed that the struggle was worthwhile, and that it was only a question of time when you will have a democratic, non-racial South Africa.
Yeah, and as you reflect on some of the, I suppose, the work that was done, and you talk about where we were in 1990, for instance, that interaction with former President Nelson Mandela. When you reflect on the democratic project of South Africa from the outside looking in, what do you say, and how do you rate how well South Africa's lived up to the promises that it made to its people pre-1994?
Well, looking at what was inherited, those were huge structures of inequality, injustice, and so 29 years after, and I was privileged also to be at the inauguration of President Mandela in May 1994. Standing there at the podium representing the United Nations, and then, of course, with President Mandela and the two deputy presidents, Thabo Mbeki and de Klerk, I saw the enormity of the challenge facing them, but I also saw the determination to begin to address them. But principally, how to unite and practicalize this rainbow coalition of a nation, and to have people feel a sense of belonging. There's still a lot of work to be done because the decades and decades of apartheid structures, is very difficult to overthrow them and to demolish them even within 30 years. But tremendous progress has been made. Yeah. South Africa has returned to the United Nations as a respected member. South Africa has been playing a major role in addressing Africa's collective challenges of conflict resolution, development, democratization, and human rights. And then, of course, being a principal partner at the global arena, working with other African leaders to make sure that Africa's voice is heard.
I actually should have started with congratulating you on being conferred, or rather being a recipient of that honorary degree. I mean, talk to me about the significance of that. And at the same time, you are also a recipient of the Order of Companions of O.R. Tambo. Talk to me about the significance of those orders for you as well.
Well, first of all, that was in 2012 when I was recognized for the role I played as the last chairman of the Special Committee Against Apartheid. My country, Nigeria, has held that position for 25 years. And my country made a lot of enemies. People who were not in support of sanctions, people who were not particularly supportive of the liberation movement. So to be recognized by this country and given the award named after Oliver Tambo, whom I met for the first time in Lusaka in the summer of 1984 as Foreign Minister of Nigeria. That was really a big honor, not only to me as a person, but the country that has led the international mobilization of support for the liberation and against apartheid. Now, of course, a couple of days ago, the University of Johannesburg gave me this honorary doctorate degree, and I felt proud because principally with all the public positions that I've taken, I'm basically a professor by training. So that was like coming home and being among students. So I'm now a proud alumnus of at the University of Johannesburg.
Full circle, that's what it is.
Absolutely.
It's absolutely full circle. I'm curious, and I think for a lot of South Africans over the past 2 days, we've talked about O.R. Tambo. There's been a lot of curiosity that I'm hearing around. How do you describe the kind of man that he was? And I'm talking about the candid moments in Lusaka that come back to you when you think about him.
Well, you know, the struggle was his life. And when he met people like me, partner in support of the freedom struggle for freedom, he couldn't help himself. He launched into several reasons why Nigeria should support the liberation movement, why they are depending on Nigeria to be part of the frontline states So the struggle was his life. He was passionate, and I think it surprised him that I stopped him in the middle of the conversation to say, Mr. Tambo, President Tambo, you are preaching to the converted. And I reached into my pocket and took out a check for $1 million in 1984 and said, I've just been instructed by my president to give you this contribution as token and further proof of our commitment. And you could see tears coming down his eyes and his face, because he expected that he would have to explain why Nigeria should support, why the international community should support, and bring this apartheid, atrocious, obnoxious system of racial injustice to an end sooner than later. But you just cannot help to be moved by that total commitment. The struggle was his life. And he did it with such dignity, such commitment, a wonderful human being.
And I think about that, and I think this is an important conversation to have, because as we reflect on 29 years of democracy in South Africa, we talk about it quite often in this country, about the contributions that were made by the continent. When you hear about the xenophobic attacks that sometimes take place in South Africa, I mean, where does that take you? Oh,
I feel very unfortunate. And that means people do not fully realize the kind of sacrifice. Take Zambia, for example. Many times the apartheid regime bombed Lusaka, you know, the sovereigns in Mozambique, the kind of anguish of Nigerians who actually they tax the Nigerian people, pay tax, we call it Mandela tax, where civil servant workers, they deducted some amount from their salaries in order to support the liberation struggle. So it's very painful to really hear about this and and for Africans to be subjected to those kind of things. Also create irritants in the relationship between a country like Nigeria and South Africa, who, in my view, are truly indispensable partner in trying to promote the larger goals and objectives of the African continent. I
quite like the use of that word, the indispensable partnership between Nigeria and South Africa. And we have this tug of war between the two countries about who's the biggest economy and who isn't. But I want to talk about the importance of that partnership on the continent, and really what can be achieved if the two countries, two power forces really on the continent, are able to work together.
Oh, absolutely, because Nigeria is clearly a dominant country in the West African region. South Africa is in Southern African community, and working together, when South Africa and Nigeria work together, we achieve a lot in promoting peace and security in the continent, without which, of course, we cannot have development. And so when those two countries work together, we move, Africa moves. When they don't, then we are slowing the kind of opportunity and not taking full advantage of what we could do together to transform Africa, to have African renaissance, and Africa the kind of Africa we want, and the Africa that is respected as a member of the international community.
Prof, as an elder who interacted with the elders of our very own country here as well, I think South Africa finds itself having a very difficult conversation lately, particularly where the international stage is sitting, about the role and the position that we take on the war in the Ukraine. I mean, this year we're chairing the BRICS, and the BRICS summit is coming up. You know, there's so much to be said about what South Africa does with its relationship with Russia. Where do you, looking at the role that we're playing, I suppose, place what South Africa should be doing about that very difficult international discussion? You
know, when South Africa speaks alone, when Nigeria speaks alone, they have different impact. But my position and my proposition is that South Africa and Nigeria and a few other leading countries should speak with one voice. When we speak with one voice, the impact is tremendous. Nigeria sees things differently because we look at the principles that we don't violate international law and respect for territorial integrity of member states of the United Nations. But nonetheless, South Africa also feels that there should be even-handed way in which the big powers react, and they don't pick and choose and take positions based on just purely national interest. But my position, and I'm reiterating it, Nigeria, South Africa, when we work together, our voice is a lot more powerful than when we speak separately.
Yeah, I think it's really difficult to disagree with anything you've said today. Thank you so much for speaking to us, Prof. We really do appreciate it, and an absolute honor having you in studio.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
That there, Professor Ibrahim Gambari, who now has received an honorary degree from the University of Johannesburg, but he's the recipient of the Order of Companions of O.R. Tambo.